Spider-Man has a huge roster of villains that kick some serious butt, and some of them are really overpowered. There's no shortage of them in the Marvel comics to keep us entertained and compelled, and put all of our trust in Spider-Man and hope that the hero will come out on top. But how would all of those villains fare in the MCU? Or rather, how would Peter Parker fare in the MCU if those villains were to enter the fray? So today we are returning to our list of the top 10 Spider-Man villains too strong for the MCU with a part 2. Now in our part 1 of this list we cover the villains who most definitely are too strong to enter the MCU at all, and some that at this point in time would make Peter Parker poop his pants if he crossed paths with them. Not saying that he isn't capable, but after Avengers Endgame, he's still dealing with a whole lot. No spoilers though, we promise, although you should go watch it. It's been out for a while. Now this time around, we're going to be focusing solely on villains who are too strong to enter the MCU right this minute, as in too much for the web-slinger to currently handle. There's a few more common Spidey villains who make appearances on this list as well. Now that's not to say that Parker won't be able to take them on sometime in the future. Like we said, it's just right now. He'd have his hands really full with them. Now before we begin our list though, I just want to shout out a brand new channel of ours called Tier List. All of the hosts from our various sister channels have come together ranking different things and subjects into tiers for your viewing pleasure. It's a whole lot of banter and bickering, friends, and familiar faces, so be sure to check it out and subscribe. We've got some stellar content coming your way. Now on to our list. And at number 10, Juggernaut. While Juggernaut may come to mind initially as an X-Men villain, he's actually got a long history with Spider-Man, having played a significant role in many of the web-slinger's stories over the years as an antagonist. Spider-Man is actually one of Juggernaut's most common foes, especially when working with his ally Black Tom Cassidy, who orders Juggernaut to kidnap a potentially useful psychic character named Madame Web. Juggernaut ends up tearing up parts of New York City in the process, and manages to evade Spider-Man, but does not succeed in getting Madame Web. He accidentally removes her from her life support device and abandons her, leaving her for dead. Spider-Man then comes up with a way to defeat him by luring him into some setting concrete, with Juggernaut sinking into it. He eventually digs himself out a month later. So why is he too strong for the MCU currently? Well, technically speaking, he could find his way into the cinematic universe and be a fitting foe for the web-slinger. It's just the grander implications that Juggernaut's appearance would have. We're not going to see the likes of Juggernaut until mutants are gradually brought into the MCU now that Disney has the rights to use them. And surely when the mutants arrive in the MCU, our heroes are going to have bigger questions, even bigger than Juggernaut, that will need addressing. So regardless, there's going to be some solid wait time before we see this hulking baddie up on the big screen. And at number 9, Big Wheel. Big Wheel is an absolutely ridiculous villain who first appeared in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 182 back in 1978. But if you think about how Big Wheel, aka Jackson Wheel, would appear in a live-action adaptation, well, he could potentially be rather deadly. In the comics, Jackson drives a large metal wheel that's equipped with guns, Waldo arms, and the ability to climb buildings, all thanks to the Tinkerer. Essentially, if this thing took to rolling around the streets of New York City in an act of domestic terrorism, Jackson could easily have a whole lot of casualties on his hands before Spider-Man even got to the scene of his crimes. He's kind of a go big or go home sort of villain, if you didn't already get that from his supervillain shtick. In reality though, or rather in the comics, Big Wheel is a bit of a joke. Jackson was a businessman who embezzled money from his company, and hired another villain named Rocket Racer to steal the incriminating evidence against him, who then tried to blackmail Big Wheel with it. Big Wheel almost commits suicide because of it and then chases Rocket Racer around the city until Spider-Man ends up intervening. 20 years later, Big Wheel would reappear, desperate to help Spider-Man in some sort of attempt for redemption, which just led to Spidey taking pity on him and letting him follow him around for the day. So in other words, if Big Wheel were to enter the MCU, he would definitely need some more threatening character traits in order to make him, well, you know, threatening. But he's got a foundation, that's something, right? And at number 8, Moreland. Moving into more serious territory with this one, in our next number we have Moreland. Moreland is a character from Loom World, also known as Earth-001. He goes around the multiverse hunting spider totems, and is the main villain in the Spider-Verse story event. In other words, he has taken on many different iterations of Spider-Man across the multiverse, meaning he's a bit of an expert when it comes to knowing his foes. Aside from that experience, he's got superhuman strength and durability, enhanced speed, agility, stamina, reflexes, has an extended longevity, and perhaps the most dangerous of his abilities, he can absorb life force via physical contact. He's also killed the 616 Spider-Man before in Spider-Man the Other story arc, although that was only temporary, like most deaths in comics. But he did manage to rip out one of Spider-Man's eyeballs, so, you know. Spider-Man, after his near-death experience, would end up in the hospital where Moreland would visit him and then break Mary Jane's arm, which somehow triggered Peter to jump into action with newfound powers, ripping out the villain's throat. Yeah, that's gruesome. Can't quite see sweet little Tom Holland pulling off that stunt just yet as Peter Parker, can you? I mean, maybe give him a few years of dealing with the multiverse drama and we'll see. And at number 7, Kane. On our previous part 1 of this list, we mentioned Jackal, the Spidey villain who cloned the web slinger and brought about a whole lot of trouble and chaos. This time around, let's take a look at some of the clones he produced. Enter Kane Parker, who would later take on the persona of the Scarlet Spider in 2011. Before his turn as a hero though, Kane was previously a baddie, first appearing in Web of Spider-Man issue 119 back in 1994. He would play a huge role in the Clone Saga. A storyline, as previously noted, is not something that Peter Parker of the MCU would be able to handle right now. So what is he capable of? He shares a lot of the traits that Peter has. Superhuman strength, speed, stamina, agility, durability, reflexes, and equilibrium. He has a precognitive spider sense. He can stick to walls. All of these, thanks to his continued mutation as a clone, were stronger and more powerful than Spider-Man's own abilities though. He was also immune to the worldwide mind purging that erased Spider-Man's identity after it was revealed. He also bears something called the Mark of Kane, a distinctive scarring he burns into people and surfaces after he defeats an enemy. Typically, he would break that enemy's neck and leave his mark on their face. It also lets him melt Spidey's webbing. Plus, if that wasn't bad enough, Kane also takes a page out of Wolverine's book by having a retractable bone spike situated on the undersides of his forearms, that he refers to as the Sting of Kane. Later, Kane would gain more abilities under his Tarantula and Scarlet Spider personas too. Moving on to 6, Spider-Side. Speaking of clones, and at this number we have another clone of Parker's made by Jackal, Spider-Side. Get it? Like genocide, but spider? He first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man issue 399 back in 1995, although he wouldn't call himself Spider-Side until a few months later in New Warriors issue 61. Anywho, he firmly believed that he was the real Peter Parker, and became obsessed with convincing Mary Jane that he was such. He was literally created by Jackal to kill Peter, MJ, and another clone, Ben Reilly, and her last number, Kane, and was programmed to be extremely violent. He also killed 2,600 innocent people in Springville, Pennsylvania after stealing a deadly virus and making it airborne. He would betray Jackal and later fall to his death off of the Daily Bugle building. Anywho, he's got a few powers that extend beyond the other clones that we've mentioned. He can do all of the stuff that Peter can do, but additionally he has control over his body on a molecular level, meaning he can do things like extend his limbs, shapeshift, change his appearance, control the density of his body tissues in order to make him more resistant to certain attacks. And has transformed his fists into various weapons. He even turned part of himself into liquid in order to simulate Spider-Man's webbing. That's intense. Up next at 5, Venom. Venom is one of Parker's most notorious and famous villains. First appearing as the symbiotic alien costume in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 252 back in 1984, Venom would bond with Peter and try to control his host, only for Peter to eventually get the help of Fantastic Four's Reed Richards to separate him from the symbiote. It would go on to bond with a character who also had a grudge with Peter, Eddie Brock, a journalist who believes Spider-Man had ruined his career. As the story goes, because Venom bonded with Peter, he's able to copy his abilities, and can shapeshift, create various weapons out of his body thanks to said shapeshifting, and is undetectable by Parker's spider sense. He's also immune to various other superpowers like Ghost Rider's penance stare. With the current state of the MCU, a character like Venom entering the fray isn't implausible. In fact, he very well could, but that would open up a whole new can of worms, so to speak, and the character, with the state Parker is in currently after the events of Avengers Endgame, would surely overpower him. And at 4, Carnage. Speaking of Venom, Carnage, the symbiote's offspring and antagonist, has been an antagonist of Spider-Man's on occasion. While the Sony Venom Maybe franchise plans on exploring Carnage and Cletus Cassidy in the upcoming Venom sequel, seeing Carnage in the MCU right now may be dabbling a little too deep into some really graphic and violent territory. Aside from his unhinged, unpredictable, and brutal tendencies, Carnage is stronger than Venom for one simple reason. All Clintar offspring, Clintar being the name of the symbiote species, are significantly stronger than the Clintar who birthed them. Hence why Venom and Spider-Man have teamed up to fight him in the past. It's Carnage's goal to kill both Spider-Man and Venom so he can be free to cause chaos, murdering whoever he pleases. But rest assured, Carnage can't exist without Venom, that is, if the MCU chose to follow his origins laid out in the comics, meaning until Eddie Brock makes his way into the cinematic universe, Carnage won't be popping up to screw with Spidey anytime soon. And at number 3, Arachne. Arachne is a spider deity, not to be confused with the second iteration of Arachne, aka Spider-Woman Julia Carpenter. This Arachne derives from the ancient Greek mythos of Arachne and the god Athena. She was a woman who claimed to be a better weaver than the god was, so Athena cursed her, turning her into a spider. Except in the comics, she's still part partially human with the body and legs of a spider. It's kinda terrifying. Anywho, she fought Spider-Man when she was employed by Hera's Olympus group, which consisted of the Olympian pantheon's gods and deities. While not much is known about her, she is a literal god, so that definitely makes her a contender for a villain that's just too strong for the cinematic universe as we know it. And at number 2, Dr. Octopus. Putting Otto Octavius on our part 2 list is kinda cheating a bit. We featured a later iteration of the character on our past list, when Otto became the superior Spider-Man. While that version of the mad scientist is surely less likely to pop up in the MCU than the OG Doc Ock is, it would be criminal not to include one of Spidey's biggest foes on this list, especially considering that the MCU Peter Parker is definitely not ready to take on the likes of Doc Ock. Considering how much of a challenge the Vulture was, Otto is like a whole other step up from that. To be fair, Parker has grown a lot. He fought alongside the other Avengers against Thanos twice, and fared his own, thanks to some major help with that new and improved Spider-Man suit from Tony Stark that he got in Avengers Infinity War. But having a tricked out suit that helps you significantly on the battlefield can't protect Peter entirely. Otto is a genius, and has outsmarted the web-slinger on several occasions beyond just switching bodies with the hero. His entrance in the MCU is surely going to be a lot for Peter to handle, even if the young hero really does step up in Far From Home. I'm sure we'll see Otto eventually though. And finally, in at number 1, Norman Osborn. Norman Osborn is yet another famous villain of Spidey's who, arguably at this point of time in the MCU, would surely outwit Peter Parker if he were to be introduced into the universe at this very moment. While there is no doubt in our mind that Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, will at some point be integrated into the MCU, there is no way that Peter Parker would be able to handle the criminal mastermind just yet. Sure, we'd bet that Peter could hold his own against the Green Goblin, but Osborn is so much more than that, as we've seen in the comics time and time again. Considering he's Peter's arch nemesis, there's definitely a reason Marvel Studios have been benching him in the Spidey stories to date. When he does arrive, and the Green Goblin begins to terrorize New York City, it'll surely be a conflict of epic proportions. Peter's got some growing to do to get there. But hey, maybe after Far From Home, Peter's growth and newfound responsibilities will place him in a prime position to take on his arch nemesis. Alright, there we have it friends, hope we didn't bash poor Spider-Man too hard in this list. The character's still growing into his superhero responsibilities in the MCU, and right now is in a bit of a precarious state. So it's easy to guess at which villains of his in the comics would be a whole lot for him to handle. That's not to say he couldn't. We're sure one day we'll be seeing him kick Osborn's butt one way or another. But in the meantime, little guy's got a long way to go. If you dug this video, be sure to hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to Top 10 Nerd for more lists just like this one. In the meantime, thanks for watching friends. I'll catch you all in the next video.